Party at the school. You could sit in front of us. You are wild. I got a microphone. Apparently not.
All right, good evening, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all so much for coming out this evening. Thank you all for coming out as often as you have this term. This will be our 5th event this term, last one. Looking forward to next year. Our first Science Cafe will be January the 27th, 7 weeks from today. And Dr. Catherine Mower from the psychology department will be giving a talk on her research on memory and forgetting, something related to attention and forgetting. I don't remember. Tonight we have Dr. Peck from the biology department. He has made his way to Kearney, Nebraska via an intriguing circuit from New Jersey, where he got a bachelor's degree, to Maryland, to California, to Alberta, Canada. Did I say anything? A postdoc in New Hampshire, just making the circuit. We wound up right here in the middle in Kearney, Nebraska. So today he's going to talk to us about invasive species and their effects on forests.
Great. Thanks so much, everyone, for coming out. And yeah, this might be a tough sell in Nebraska, but I'll try to do my best. So I'm talking about two things that you might not think about first when you're in Nebraska. One, which is forests, and two, insect outbreaks within forests. So before I begin, I'd just like to acknowledge it's really just a suite of students and professors, mentors, at the university level, as well as funding agencies, institutes. Really what I'm going to be showing you today is kind of a culmination of the last decade or so of work looking at this particular topic. So it does take a kind of an army to make it all happen. So for the talk today, I'm going to break it down. So number one, just give you a little introduction on forests. So everyone can kind of start with a baseline. And then I talk about how forests are kind of intimately linked with disturbance, or this idea of disturbance events. And then from there, give two more or less case studies, one from eastern North America, which is Hemlock woolly adelgid, and then one from western North America, which is mountain pine beetle. And then I'm going to try to wrap it up with some implications, some generalities across the different insect outbreaks, and then kind of next steps or directions. Where do we see all of this going? Okay. And so I'd like to start out just, I guess the pointer doesn't reach that far, but map of North America, and hopefully what you can see is the green. So the green represents different types of forest ecosystems. The ones on kind of the western side are darker, so more of your conifer type species, and the ones to the east, your broadleaf, are kind of denoted with the lighter colors. And so overall, if we look at land area, forests in North America make up like 40% of it, okay? And from an economic as well as an ecological standpoint, super, super important, okay? So from timber production and kind of all that goes along with that, with pulp and construction, to fresh water, to carbon storage, to recreation, okay? And so what's intimately linked with forests is this idea of disturbance or disturbance events. Okay, and so disturbances, it can be pretty hard to define based on the organism that you're looking at or the system at a particular time. But back in the mid-80s, disturbance ecology or theory going into kind of practice came about, and it was a nice definition that is still used today as kind of a baseline for what that means. And so it's any relatively discrete event in time that disrupts ecosystem, community, or population structure and changes resources, substrate availability, or the physical environment. Right? So it's pretty broad. It can go, across different organizational levels, and depending on the type of disturbance, whether it's abiotic, so for example, like fire, flooding, even insect outbreaks, to other types that are, for example, human-caused disturbances, such as harvesting, different degrees based on management strategies. But forests or forested systems need these disturbance events. They kind of keep them in check in the sense that they allow for the vegetation to regrow, for nutrients to kind of cycle through those systems, and allowing for kind of new species or old species to either get introduced or get replaced. And so just adding to the overall kind of complexity and biodiversity of these particular systems. And so if we focus in particular on insect outbreaks, what has really been happening, or actually let me take a step back. What's been happening over the last few decades is that there's an increase in these different ecosystem disturbances. So you can hopefully see that all across North America. And this figure just kind of breaks that down. So the white represents just natural variability, that we would expect year to year or decade to decade. Yellow, more moderate severity, and red, high severity. And so areas in Southwest North America, or just Western North America in general, right, increase in wildfire, increase in drought, land clearing, wildfire, logging, even with hurricanes. And if you've been paying attention to the news, obviously this summer has been one of actually the worst on record in Western North America, particularly in California, with regard to fires. And that trend, seems that will hold. That these events will become more severe, more frequent, and more intense. And so, if we key in particular to insect outbreaks, they're occurring with greater intensity in areas previously just not subject to those occurrences. Okay, and so that's due to kind of two things that we've seen over kind of recorded history now. One is an increase in temperature, not just summer temperatures, but winter temperatures. Winter temperatures kind of keep these populations at bay, and so if those are much, or winters are much cooler, those insects are able to persist at greater densities. And two is precipitation. It's becoming more variable. Places that have been drier are becoming a little wetter, and vice versa. Places that have had some or an increase in precipitation are experiencing extreme drought events. And so you have these trees that make up these forests super stressed out, and also the increase in insect populations in those areas. And so you kind of get this perfect storm where the insects are able to kind of have these mass infestations and kind of wreak havoc on these forests. And the forests themselves, the individual trees within those forests, are just not able to kind of cope with that kind of massive attack that's been occurring over the last few decades. Okay. And so insect outbreaks are really a different type of disturbance agent. So for example, like fire in the middle here, or human-caused disturbance like logging, you can see that these large trees are just wiped out off the landscape. Soils are disrupted, right? No vegetation there. Versus with insect outbreaks in general, they go and obviously attack the trees, but the trees stand there for half a decade to a decade before they start falling down. And so there is some light availability that's going through, but overall, you still have that structure within the forest. The other thing is that the understory species, they're not affected. Forest floor, it's not affected. And the soils themselves, at least directly with regard to those insect outbreaks, are not affected either. Okay. And so the next few slides, what I'm going to show you is kind of, in general, what we have been seeing with regard to how forest structure is being altered by these outbreaks over the last few decades. And some of my examples obviously might be from pine forests or just specific to mountain pine beetle, but we can, at this point, make a fair assumption to generalize across different types of these insect outbreaks. And so for one, the other thing is we just have kind of this conceptual diagram down here. And so we'll have true mortality going from 0 to 100%, and then some factor that we're measuring on the axis. So overall, we see that in the first few years following an outbreak, there's an increase in understory diversity as well as productivity. Right? There's a release from root competition. The trees are dying or they're dead, and their leaves are falling down, and that's allowing for more light to come in and more nutrients and moisture available to those particular species. Two, this kind of goes hand in hand with regard to canopy openness. So before beetle, this pretty much would be a closed canopy system, but here obviously you can see that there is a good amount of light that is now able to penetrate through. So what does that do? Well, that is going to change a bunch of things. And for one, directly or indirectly with regard to soil nutrient availability. Okay, so you have these large trees, they're dying off, they're flushing all their nutrients, either through their rooting systems or through the needles and leaves that are falling down. And so again, that's aiding, and that's helping out those understory species, getting more numbers of species as well as greater biomass. Also what's happening, soil moisture content is increasing, right? So the hydrological cycle overall is changing, and there may be effects on at a larger landscape scale with watershed and so forth. Again, trees take up a lot of water per day. Okay? When they're not doing that, when they're dying, or they've been killed, all of that has to go somewhere. And then finally, again, this might go hand in hand, but root biomass, particularly from trees, again, they're not photosynthesizing, they're not growing, and so what happens is you get a huge decline in biomass, which means is that those soils are changing, right? Those chemical and physical properties of the soils are changing as well. Okay. A couple of other things. So when we think about, well, what's going to happen after insect comes through, so these forests get decimated, one is with regard to, well, forests will regenerate. But what we're showing is that, again, at least in the first few years, seedlings are just not able to survive. Right? All of that stuff that happened before with those abiotic conditions, well, we're translating into the word seedling survival establishment. Two is that seedlings in those infested forests actually have lower secondary defense chemistry. What that means is that they cannot defend as well the next kind of outbreak or infestation that might occur versus seedlings that are in understory forests. And that's huge, right? There's these transgenerational effects just within 4 or 5 years time following an outbreak. And then finally, a couple of other things are occurring. So looking at the squirrel crops or mushrooms, I know again, Nebraska is not the biggest for mushroom hunting, but if you're on the closer to the rivers, Niagara or Missouri River, you will find them in May and late fall. But anyway, what we've also seen is that these kind of reproductive structures of the fungus themselves are declining with that mortality. Okay, and that means is that there's an intimate link between soils, the microbial communities there, and the trees themselves. And so obviously if they're shifting, and soil properties are shifting, you're really getting a full reorganization of forest structure and function potential. The other thing is that we see that same thing going on with that mirroring below ground. So this is with regard to fungi that are able to kind of emanate these piping through the soils. And so again, there's a decline in that. Okay, so why do we care? What does this all mean? And if we think about this idea of forest trajectories, so will we get a forest, for example, this is eastern hemlock, will it return back to eastern hemlock? Will we get the same economic and ecological values back, those services back, as we had once before? Or will it turn into something different? So for example, like a birch forest here. And if we think about, in light of warming and precipitation events, how is the amount of carbon that's potentially being sequestered by this forest changing? And so an eastern hemlock forest can sequester a lot more of that carbon than a birch forest can. And so yes, on the one hand, you can see a lot more green, a lot more species there. That's great. Okay, but on the other hand, you have a lot less of that storage there. And so what happens? That goes back up into the atmosphere. And so you get this negative feedback loop that starts occurring. And so that all gets kind of compounded with regard to warming. Okay. So hopefully everyone's been following along here. I know it's a lot of information to get everyone up to speed. But really, where I'm trying to get at, and I alluded to in the previous slide, is what's going on below ground, especially if we're trying to link this idea of forest trajectories to kind of carbon uptake. And so we really have to start thinking about those soil microbial communities. What happens when these large trees die off? What happens to those communities? How then are they responding? And then two, how is it getting translated into the different functions that they play with regard to the nutrient and carbon cycle? And so when I talk about soil, when we talk about microbial communities, I'm really going to focus on soil fungi. And so here's an example. Students like to take pictures of you when you've been working in the field for 14 hours, you get a little loopy, and so that's what happens. Anyway, I always like to add that there, but there are some fungi right here. This is mycelium, which is a pretty common decomposer indoor in the forest. But anyway, soil fungi come in all different shapes and sizes, right? Ones that actually attack nematodes, ones that form these structures called mycorrhizae that help their host plants, ones that are found outside of the root, ones that are found inside of the root, ones that are for decomposition, ones that are more like plant pathogens. So anyway, lots of different functional roles, but all important with regard to regeneration, succession of these forests. And so when we talk about fungi, we can really break them down into three different types of lifestyles. So the first one are decomposers. Okay, so taking kind of dead organic matter and processing it. Two is with regard to pathogens. Okay, and so they're really taking up the nutrients from their host, and their host's fitness is getting reduced. And finally, there are symbiotrophs. So this is where a root and a fungus come together and they form these structures called mycorrhizae. And those structures help out the tree in the sense that they can explore the soils much easier and get nutrients and to some degree water for defenses, which trees or just different plant species couldn't do. And in return, the plant gives them carbon. before kind of job well done. Okay, so this kind of leads me into my first example. And looking at the below ground consequences of a really nasty forest pest, which is actually an invasive as well within eastern New England hemlock forest. And this is in collaboration with Dave Warwick, who's over at Harvard Forest and certified over at the University of New Hampshire. I know, more information. But anyway, when you finish or when I finish today, everyone can go home and be like, wow, I am now an expert on insect biology. And tell Dr. Drew, hey, did you know? So, okay, going back to hemlock really adultery. So super tiny, about 1/32nd or 1/64th of an inch, depending on its life cycle. Super tiny, and native to Japan and kind of southeastern Asia. Brought over in the 1950s as nursery stock to somewhere in the Virginia, DC area, and then has kind of spread like wildfire since then up the coast. Now it's actually in Canada as well. And so eastern hemlock, which is a dominant tree species in this area, just can't, has no known resistance, at least that we know of now. And so is not able to actually defend itself, even with small defoliation heads. There is western hemlock here, which kind of I have an arrow pointing to. They do have some no-known defenses, and actually those populations of woolly Belgian are actually up big. So it's really an eastern hemlock issue. But what they do is they'll go and they'll form these kind of little cocoons, and where the stem and the needles meet, they'll go and start sap sucking on the phloem there, and just basically stop that whole cycle within the tree. And within 4 to 6 years, trees will just go from green to gray, and then eventually, over a year or so, they'll just, the branches and twigs and so forth will start falling down. Okay. And so, well, why do we care about eastern hemlock, right? Very embarrassing. But, so the significance of it, again, twofold. One, economic, two, ecological. Economically, maybe not as important. There are a lot of other tree species that are used for wood production and wood fiber, things like that. But hemlock is still used for pulp and construction. It's a pretty cheap type of tree, well, at least economic-wise. The two is ecological, and this is super important. Eastern hemlock, they're basically foundational species. They engineer the ecosystems, or this ecosystem that you see here. And so without them, you wouldn't have the type of hydrological cycles that you see within those eastern forests. During the summer, the understory, the forest floor would be super hot, would be super dry. Here it's moist. The amount of cover for different types of animal populations, that would change, right? All of that spatial distribution would change. So really foundational in terms of that. Also hydrological cycles, nutrient cycles. And so, again, what happens when these forests go away? Okay, and the objective then of this study, which is still ongoing, is kind of threefold. One, quantify, characterize some of the soil characteristics between infested and uninfested sites. Two, determine formal communities are different. And then three, are there any kind of general relationships that occur? And so the study area, just to orient yourselves, so over at Harvard Forest, kind of an hour and a half west of Boston, Massachusetts, and there are a number of different tracts. And within them is the Prospect Hill tract. And so there we have kind of this gradient of type from 0 to 100%. And there, we took different soil cores, we measured respiration, different soil properties, as well as canopy loss. Okay. And so we're not just, or I'm just not a field geek, I do work in the lab as well. And so for those of you that might not be familiar with how we actually characterize these fungi, so one's found within the soil, or those that are associated with roots. We'll go and core them, and then we'll kind of grind them up. We'll extract their DNA, we'll amplify that, we'll sequence them, and then depending on if we're just looking at them within soils or on roots, we'll use different like high throughput or center sequencing, and then we'll put them through a bunch of different filtering and clustering informatic strategies, and hopefully get some type of taxonomic adaptation from that. Okay. And so the next few slides, what I'm going to show you are just some preliminary results of what we're starting to see happening within these forests. And color coding is a little tough to see, but it goes from 0 to 100. But basically, on the left-hand side are healthy forests. On the right-hand side is gray area, or 100% foliated. And the reason why we kind of put them into categories is defoliation is really tough to estimate with regard to adelgid. And so we kind of try to group them at least into some reasonable, rational way. So just like before when I was showing you with regard to moisture and moisture increases, we also see this in part with regard to these forests. So increasing from uninfested to infested sites. We also see some other things occurring. So we have this reduction in organic layer depth, right? And so less organic layer depth means that obviously either respiration is increasing or that you have a great loss in like overall root biomass. And so that's what's actually occurring. There's lower total root biomass in infested versus uninfested sites. And this is for fine roots as well as coarse roots as well as overall roots. One thing to kind of note is just with a little bit of a tap, or defoliation in this case, there is a huge drop in root biomass. And that stays kind of consistent across all the other, or across that gradient. We also see a similar pattern then with regard to soil respiration. Again, this kind of almost a one-fold drop from healthy sites to ones with just a bit of defoliation. And again, that stays pretty consistent across that gradient. And so we're seeing lowest soil respiration where hemlock is being replaced by black birch. Okay, if we look at fungi, or this idea of fungal to bacterial abundance, there's a bit of variability here, but if you just key in on the uninfested and 100% defoliated site, there is a decline. So if your number is above 1, that means there's more fungi to bacteria within that community. If it's less than 1, it's more bacteria to fungi. So already the system is bacterial dominated, and it's actually becoming more bacterial dominated. So that might be favoring those black birch communities. We just don't know, but we're kind of hypothesizing that. If we look more specifically at the fungi themselves, so overall, this is just kind of number of fungi. We see that there is, again, this kind of sharp decline. And this is on the rooting systems themselves. And then ones that form that mycorrhizal symbiosis with them, we're seeing a similar pattern. And it seems that this is driving the overall pattern that we might be seeing in roots. And finally, we just wanted to see, are there any relationships between all these different factors? And so a couple popped out. One is with regard to that symbiosis. Same color coding again. And so you actually have to read the graph from right to left in this case. So areas that are uninfested have higher root biomass, and also an increase in these types of fungi. And as the fungi decline, so root biomass declines, so do the fungi. And then the other kind of key point here is that if you have higher amounts of root biomass, you also have higher rates of soil respiration. Okay? And so again, as that's declining, so is soil respiration, and that's linked to the fungi themselves as well. Okay, so a couple of take-homes from this. So one, within a very short time period, we're talking 4 to 6 years, kind of these far-reaching below-ground impacts that sometimes may not be as visible. So one, there's really these sharp changes in biogeochemical processes. And then two, and hopefully those last few slides alluded to that, is that these forests that are affected by woolly adelgid may not really remain a carbon sink. So, based on that reorganization of slave structure. And so what that ultimately means for carbon cycling within that system, within eastern New England area, we're still working through that with the field work as well as the models. Okay, so I'm going to now shift gears from east to west coast and going from looking at forest structure to kind of, to looking at function. Okay, and so this is with regard to regeneration and seedling survival in these insect-killed stands. And again, we're trying to just generalize across these different outbreaks. This has been work that I started for my PhD and still keeps going, it seems, since with Justine Karst and James Cahill over at University of Alberta and Suzanne Simard over at University of British Columbia. Okay, a couple more fun facts. So we know a little bit about adelgid, now a little bit about pine beetle. Pine beetle, a couple of endemic populations that are east of the Rockies, but most of the pine beetle found in British Columbia. And over the last number of decades, they have really expanded northward and then eastward. There was a perfect storm that happened in the late 2000s, really strong jet streams as well. And so they were able to actually go over the Rockies. No one actually thought that was possible, but it did occur. And so it got into these lodgepole pine forests that, yes, they've experienced insect outbreaks in the past, but not, at least for what we know, in recorded history. And so they're really these naive forests that do have some defenses, but obviously with mass outbreaks, they're just not able to cope with that. Okay. And very quickly on beetle biology. Similar to what adelgid is doing, but they're a little nastier of how they do it. So, again, these are super tiny, a couple of millimeters in length. Female goes out, finds a nice juicy tree, then sends out some pheromones. All right, come on everybody, let's go and attack this tree. And what they do is they go and burrow in and create these galleries within the tree themselves. So they start eating on the sugars, the phloem within the tree. The tree tries to defend itself by shooting out resin and other defensive compounds in what we call pitch tubes here. But if you get a lot of these beetles that come through, the tree's defenses are overtaken, compromised. And so the tree starts going from green to red to finally losing its needle, it's going gray. But where beetle is a lot nastier, I think, than adelgid is that it not only attacks the phloem, it also attacks the xylem. It shuts down the water transport system within the tree itself. The other thing is that mountain pine beetle has a sylvanite that goes along for the ride, this blue stain fungus. And the blue stain fungus actually does the remainder of the work within these galleries as well. So it's kind of this 1, 2, 3 punch with pine beetle. Now the time that it takes here is a little longer, but in the end, same effects. Okay, so let's go back to seedlings and this idea of, well, what are the factors that actually affect regeneration? So a few of them. One, obviously, are the overstored trees. Two are any of the understored trees, right? So we're just talking about competition for light, for nutrients, different types of resources. Obviously, moisture is important too, especially for young seedlings coming up. Any type of root competition that is occurring. But then there's this other link, and we've only seen it in the last, we've only been able to document it more stringently over the last few decades. And that's with regard to these hyphal networks. So we know now that at a stand level, forests or trees are interconnected with each other. And so what might that actually mean for these seedlings? Can being connected to a network aid in them being able to survive and establish following these outbreaks? And so the idea behind this, I'm not joking, this is true, you can go and call her or email her up. So my co-supervisor, Suzanne Samard over at UBC, I don't know if anybody has seen Avatar. It's a pretty old movie, maybe not for the youngins back there, but not James Cameron himself, but some of his associates actually called her up because they've heard about this idea of networks and resources being shared between common trees or different types of trees. And so the idea or the premise behind Avatar, right, you have this mother tree that then everyone else is interconnected to. Same idea with regard to network theory. Okay? We actually call them mother trees as well, or donor trees, and we have receiver trees. A little fact. So let's get into these fungal networks themselves. Here's just an example. You have two seedlings, and over a few months, you actually see that the rooting systems are being interconnected. And this white stuff that you see all around, those are the hyphae themselves. And so they're actually making those connections. On the right here is kind of confirmation that this is actually occurring. So this is at a stand level, and this arrow here is pointing to this Doug fir tree. And so this Doug fir tree, they were able to isotope label two different types of fungi. And just those two different types of fungi actually connect 47 other tree species to this one Doug fir. So this is a really intricate type of network that's there. And again, the question is, what happens when you have these large trees that die off? Is this network still there? Is it degraded? And what does that actually mean for the seedlings themselves? Okay? And so that's really where the question is kind of led to, right? Does access to the fungal network enhance tree seed and growth survival? Does it increase nutrient uptake? So really quickly, if we look at the functional role of these networks, if these networks really don't matter that much, right, we might see some type of flat line down here. But if being connected to the network is really important for establishment, then we might see this red line up here. Okay? However, there's a third scenario, and this comes with regard to tree mortality, is that role might actually be degraded across that mortality rate. Okay, so the study area here was in kind of the heart of beetle-killed lodgepole pine stands in west central Alberta, and this is across a 50-kilometer square area, and it shows 11 sites. Again, kind of across this gradient of mortality. We took a bunch of different measures, soil measurements there. And we also set up these different experimental treatments. So these are called, these are mesh bags, and they have different pore sizes. So they allow for hyphae to come in or not. They allow for roots to be excluded or not. Okay? And we place those about 1 meter around each of these mother trees or hub trees. And then we planted the seedlings, or sowed the seeds within it. This was a pretty extensive project over 3 years. Around 700 seedlings got planted. So it was a big endeavor. Just really, I like this picture. So it's bear country out there. And there was some kind of scent on these bags. Not sure what it was, but put them out, came back a couple of weeks later, and all of a sudden a couple of sites looked like that. Bears really were interested in what was going on. So we had to redo. And if anybody has dug holes, especially in tough clay, it's stressful. It's tough management. So let's just take a particular site that wasn't intact. 3-4 years later, you come back, and little seedlings here. So I like to show this that yes, there are all these effects where the trees start toppling over, and obviously you get this kind of opening into play with regard to light levels and so forth. Okay, so really quickly, functional role of these networks. So again, 3 different mesh treatments. Some allow root and hyphate to penetrate through and be connected to, or allow for that seedling to have the potential to be connected to the roots and hyphate. Ones that just allow hyphate to penetrate through, and then kind of are controls where no roots or hyphate were able to access. And so a couple things we found. One, seedling survival declines across that tree mortality rate. So again, here's just another example. If you think back to those slides in the beginning, and it doesn't matter, really there's no effect of treatment on this. There's just one main effect. Increasing tree mortality, you get a decline in seedlings or seedling survival. However, when you start looking at other factors, for example, seedling biomass, we see that from uninfested and unattacked to attacked stands, if you're only connected to that network or to those hyphae, you actually get a benefit. Versus if you have roots or you're not connected at all, you can stay similar with regard to biomass. And then same thing we see with regard to foliar phosphorus. Again, there's kind of this net benefit of being connected only to that network. What we're seeing in these other lines, especially the one where you're connected to the network and roots, and there's a slight decline, is that the strength of root competition is constant across this gradient. And so, potential mechanism why those seedlings are declining isn't that necessarily these networks are degraded, is that root competition is playing a larger role within their establishment themselves. Okay, so again, to summarize, yes, there is a positive influence if you're only accessing those networks, and it doesn't seem that they're actually degraded. So again, what's going on? What other kind of micro habitat factors are occurring? Okay, so last few slides, let's put it all together. So some implications following insect outbreak. One, vegetation, soil fungi. Obviously, they're changing based on site conditions, based on severity, and there may be what we term as a legacy effect, right? So these forests are changing, and they're probably going to change without some type of management intervention. Okay? We do see that natural regeneration is being limited following these outbreaks, and that's just not with pine seedlings. We also see that with spruce. We also see that with eastern hemlock and other species. With other types of defoliation and insect outbreak events. And so it may lead to these different pathways, and we might see some structural or compositional diversity within these forests. It may, and again, that there's some positives to that, but again, from a carbon uptake perspective, some negative connotations there. And so some next steps. So one, continue to compare natural regeneration, presence, absence of different management strategies or techniques. Might want to implement some type of conventional management strategy. So for example, fire harvesting that has been used. Something that we've been working on is, I like to call it Alpine Beetle 2. We wanted to test this idea of the variability in soils across the landscape is actually driving one of the changes that we're seeing in the microbes, rather than the insect outbreak itself and its effect on the trees. And so that's just a revision right now. The short answer is yes, but it depends. And so if you're looking at the first 4 to 6 years, insect outbreak, super important, right? If you're looking further down the line, so a decade plus later, soils start to become a little bit more, where the relative importance is increased with regard to responses of these microbial communities. But when you put it all together, insect outbreaks still beats out any kind of natural variation that you see in the landscape. I don't know how we are on time, but that's about that. And glad to answer any questions. You can check me out on Twitter and email me if you want to. Great, thank you so much. And I stop talking and that generator or heater stops working too. I see. Yes.
Do you have plans to look at how the soil microbiome or river microbiome, how it's changing, like actually characterize the bacteria?
So for the bacteria, it would be great to do that. No plans for bacteria yet. Well, okay, so let me back up. For hemlock, yes, we are looking at that strain. I mean, the goal is to do some follow-up studies this summer. Therefore, or with regard to now pine beetle, not yet. It is something that would be of interest to see if we're seeing similar patterns, like with the ratio of fungi to bacteria. If these systems are bacterial dominated as well. Nobody has it yet, and not many people are actually looking at bacteria, which is kind of, yeah, exactly. Well, so the reason I think why they're not looking at it as much is because of that that close, intimate connection between the fungus and the trees themselves, and so that's where a lot of that nutrient transfer is occurring. In recent years, we've also found out that those kind of symbiotropic fungi, they're able to kind of sway back and forth on this mutualism parasitism spectrum. And so depending on where they are in their life cycle, they actually can change from being beneficial to being detrimental. And they also can, at low levels, decompose some basic organic matter. So their role is super important and might outweigh, at least within pine forests, when we need to do some bacteria. Yes?
How would you go about separating out the effects of decreased canopy and then the subsequent increase in direct solar radiation, soil microclimate, and changes in understory composition?
How would I go about doing that?
If the connection is the big trees and microizing.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's a good question. We try to do it at least in some type of statistical model approach. And so if we get enough samples for that, we're able to then put it into what we call structural equation models. And we're able to tease apart those different relative importances. So we'll take all those measures that you were alluding to, and then try to see which one actually has a greater influence. But it's still that, it's not that correlation is causation, but at least we're starting to get into that. Within the greenhouse, obviously, we can break down some of those mechanisms too. It's what a couple of forest ecologists call a complex adaptive system. It's really tough to tease apart.
My question is not fully formulated. When you have half of it
It's
by
okay.
head.
I don't know if my presentation is fully formulated.
So when you talk about the impact, the relationship between defoliation and changes in the soil structure, particularly fungal to bacterial migration, I'm worried whether you explore the spatial and temporal correlation between those two. Because the spread of the insect above ground will follow one model, and I'm wondering whether there's some sort of formula or recipe to how, I don't know if that's the right term, bad fungi, bad microbes might be spreading.
Yeah, so no, great question. So paper just came out earlier this year, Pure J, so answers that question. So I looked at least in the pine beetle system with regard to that, is what we're seeing with above ground and that spread, spatially speaking, of the insect being in a sense, merely below ground. And is that what you're trying to get at, or no?
So you're saying the below ground is happening first and insect is following?
Oh, no. So insect is happening first, but below
Okay,
ground,
yeah,
below ground, with regard to fungi and bacteria, that ratio, it's becoming more homogeneous. So it's not necessarily that it's good fungi, bad fungi, or good bacteria, bad bacteria. It's that in uninfested forests, there's just more heterogeneity within the system. And so adding to some of this complexity and added function, whereas with that spreader beetle, you get just a much more simplified community. And so that might be also another reason why we're not seeing such increases in regeneration too. It's just because that system is so simplified. So it might just take time in itself to regenerate. There's a question over there.
How does recovery from insect infestation compare to recovery from Agent Orange?
I don't know if I can speak on that. So, I don't have an answer, unless you have an answer to that.
No, I don't have an answer. I mean, really hypothetically, how do you think recovery would look in a broad, widespread forest, let's say a spruce forest, that may have been responding to increased fire with warming versus insect with warming?
Yeah, and so you're touching on an important point, and if anybody from the forest industry is here, sorry, but forest, especially North America, both the US and Canada, they have suppressed fires, and fire is a natural part of these ecosystems, especially in Western North America. And so, yeah, they would respond in a more, I wouldn't say natural way, but it would be a more natural successional pathway to that, ones that we've seen historically versus now, which is you have a lot of fire suppression coupled with warming, which then is stressing out the trees, which then is leading to these insect outbreaks coming in, which is also leading to them being more successful, which then is just restructuring those forests in general. And so really without human intervention in those lodgepole pine stands up in Alberta, you're probably not going to see pine there for at least 100 plus years. I mean, that's just my opinion, but that's where the models are showing. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad thing, but pine is very important for the timber industry, and obviously for how those systems function. Spruce, it just grows a lot slower. It's a lot more nutrient limited. It just acts a lot differently from that. Will it be able to sequester a bit more carbon? Potentially. So maybe there's a trade-off there. Those are good. Yeah, that's a good question. It's tough to answer, but yeah, fire suppression has been a big reason for what we're seeing with the outbreaks themselves, and not just now in these plant forests, but just all other times. Yes.
So I kind of have a follow-up question, or a question. So you said that the microbial community becomes more diverse. Is that what you said, or is it simpler?
It becomes more simplified.
Okay. So that's what I thought. So is it possible that it's kind of like, we call it king of the hill hypothesis, like in your gut, like if you take too many antibiotics, like you could get an influx of like C. diff, and it's bad for you? Is that possible that that's happening, that maybe you have pathogens underground, that the quote-unquote good bacteria gets knocked out and then you get an influx of bad bacteria?
Yeah, no, that hypothesis, yes, and great question. So, no one's really working on that in these systems. However, we do see that within grassland systems. And so some work out of Saskatchewan, as well as Alberta, has been showing that over the last number of years that yes, you get this kind of switch to a less diverse community, and they're focused on bacteria. And what you're getting also is this kind of influx of pathogens coming in. And so it's kind of this 1-2 punch, which is then changing those native grasslands, native prairies to just invasive land, for example. Yeah, and so no, it would be great to test that. We did look at pathogens in both of these systems. We do see that some have higher relative abundances than others, but we haven't taken it to that extent. But it's a great question.
So if you wanted to manage the forest, bring the forest back quicker, and you go in and you plant trees, should they also be spiking the forest with the plants that come back? And how much is that actually done?
We've tried to propose that, or at least these research groups have. Fungi on a forester's list is, I don't know, 15th, 20th down.
But if all your seedlings are dying because that's
Yeah. So what at least management is looking at now is just how to kind of create or target certain areas that have those like microclimatic conditions that are more applicable for those seedlings. And so that's what they're targeting, kind of mass seeding in those areas, either through plantings or through just kind of citizen science reforestation efforts. But the fungal component, it is a small but active line of research. They have looked, and it's been shown, again, in prairie systems with regard to soil amendments, so actually taking healthy soils or that kind of cocktail of microbes and putting them into these infested areas, and over time, naturally, it kind of resets itself in a sense, yeah. And so they've also done it with mining sites. The mining sites is horrible. I mean, it's almost like you're starting from scratch, primary succession, and they've been showing that steadily as well. So, yeah, I think it would be great if they did that here. Great question. I didn't know there was so many forest lovers out here. All right, if there's no other questions, then thanks so much. And I'll be here.